At this point, we have been introduced to SVGs, the fundamentals of scalable vector graphics. We've been introduced to the basics of D3, which manipulates and works on scalable vector graphics, but it does it programmatically using JavaScript. Now let's look at creating a bar chart similar to the one we created a couple of units back, but this time creating it programmatically using D3. So we have a data set here of discrete integer values, and we are setting our height, width, bar padding variables for use later on. And this pattern is quite common. We use our D3 object to create an SVG object. We're using the select, and the select ties our viewport to a div with an ID called draw here. Once we've that done, we then append an SVG as a child of that div. It's part of the document object model. And the height and the width of that viewport is determined by the H and W variables, which we define on lines 17 and 18. Now we're setting up our bar chart. And on line 34, we define what the rectangle will look like. So we append a rectangle, going to give it its x and y coordinates, its height and its width. So let's set the x coordinate. And again, this will be a function, and the function takes in two parameters, or uses two parameters, d and I. D is the datum, which is the actual value in the dataset array, and I is the index of that datum. And the x value is going to be the width divided by the dataset length. And remember, the length property is available on every array in JavaScript. Okay, let's set the y value for each bar, and it's the height minus d. Now let's set the rectangle height, and it'll be d. That'll be the actual value of the datum at that point in the array. Let's set the width, and the width will be w divided by the dataset length minus the bar padding. Let's check that now. And there you have it. There's our bar chart. You can see the heights, you can see the padding. And again, the default color is black because unless you specify otherwise, both text and textual elements will be rendered in black by default in the browser. So let's refactor this a little bit, just do a little bit of cleaning. So let's set the column width. So we're just being a little bit more efficient here with our variables, our variable usage. Now, that's in the wrong place. Let's move it down, because otherwise we're trying to access a variable called dataset that has yet to be defined. Remember, by default, JavaScript interprets variables in the order they appear. So let's replace our earlier calculation with call width. We can actually clean this up even more. Let's call it the bar width. So we can remove those and clean up our code. It doesn't necessarily improve the execution speed, but it makes it a little bit more elegant and more readable. Okay, and that works. So what we'd like to do now is we would like to make our data visualization, our bar charts, that little bit more informative, that little bit more visually richer. And in order to do that, let's display the actual values, the integer values for each bar, represent them on the bar itself. In other words, the data entries are the datums inside the data set. Let's display those on the bar, each bar element itself, to provide a richer feedback to the viewer. So in this case, we use a text object. Again, we bind the text to the data set. That's where we get our values from. So for each entry in the data set, there will be a text object created. Now, on line 57, you can see there's an attribute. It's an SVG attribute called text anchor, and we're setting it to middle. It's a bit like in a normal text editor such as Word or so on. You have left align, middle, and right align. So we're center aligning our text on the bar itself. And we're setting some additional text properties such as the font family, sans serif, a default sans serif, giving it a font size of 11 pixels, and we're going to fill the text element with a color white. You can use hex values as well. We're just using the web palette representation, that limited web palette representation, just for simplicity. Now notice the Y value, we're using the height minus D plus 14. So it'll be 14 pixels down from the top of the bar itself, its positioning. And we're specifying the X coordinate of our entry in the middle of each bar chart. So you can see it there, more informative, richer. So we're moving along nicely. We're now using D3 to programmatically bind data to SVGs and represent them in a visual format.